Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. And I am honored today to have ILLEANA Douglas on my show, who I'm such a fan of. ILLEANA Douglas has appeared in such films as Goodfellas, Cape Fear, To Die For, Grace of My Heart, and Ghost World, as well as in the TV shows Goliath, Shrill, Entourage, and 6 Feet Under. She is the author of I Blame Dennis Hopper and Other Stories from a Life Lived in and Out of the Movies, which is a book I highly recommend. A regular contributor to Trailers from Hell, she's done memorable film interviews and introductions for Turner Classic Movies, for Criterion Channel, and on her podcast, The Film Scene. And she has a new book out now, which is hopefully not going to be blurry when I show it on Zoom, but it is a little bit. Connecticut in the Movies, but ILLEANA's got it in the background there, which I absolutely loved. ILLEANA, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's so great to have you. And I love this book. This is such a treasure because for me, it's almost like you have uncovered a film history that at least I never thought of. Like, it's almost like a genre or a style onto its own, sort of like when the critics started to discover film noir, like they started to see these themes and styles and emotions that were very, very similar. And to this, it's not even just that the movies take place in Connecticut. It's that there's genres where, like, dark suburbia, going from the big city life and curing yourself in the country, the sex comedies. And I'm like, you never think of Connecticut. And and I discovered so many great films as well. So I absolutely loved it. I really did.
Thank you. Yeah, that was kind of why I wanted to write the book. Goes back to my fascination of, growing up here and then seeing movies. And you notice that Connecticut is almost like a character in the film.
Right.
We're going to Connecticut in the 1930s movies. It would just be, these wealthy heiresses, and we're going off to Connecticut. But then also Alfred Hitchcock, interestingly, used it for his film Rope, which is about the Leopold and Loeb murders from Chicago. But interestingly, he shifted the two characters, that they go to Yale and that they have a hunter, and that they're going to, after they murder their classmate, they're going to bury him at Mother's farm in Connecticut. And I think there's just something about that it always fascinated me. Why does Connecticut, that punctuation, that state of mind? And as I delved into this subject, it became more and more, there actually is this again and again and again, these genres that use Connecticut as a frame for the film.
Yes. Well, it's fascinating because, at least in terms of like cities or states, when we think like cities that revolve around movies, as often you think New York, you think Los Angeles, maybe Chicago, but again, you just don't think Connecticut that often. But as you have proven, it's such a big part of film history. So when because I know, you're a historian yourself, like when did you begin to see that there were genres and styles surrounding the state? When did that start to hit you?
It always bubbled up in my mind. And as I write in the book, when I worked for a film publicist named Peggy Siegel, we shared offices with Frank Perry. And I had my first little bit part in a movie because of him, and I got to know him, and he understood my interest in movies, not just as an actor, but that I loved movies. And so he gave me all of his films, and he gave me a VHS copy of The Swimmer. And it was the first movie that I specifically saw. Okay, the entire movie takes place in a section of Connecticut that was always considered where I lived on my part of Connecticut, because we lived more on the shoreline in Old Saybrook area. and that was a little bit more blue collar. And so Westport, Darien, they always seem like these very forbidden parts of Connecticut. Fairfield County, where very wealthy people lived, or New Yorkers moved, or movie stars like Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. Westport, it create, it was a whole sort of state of mind.
Right.
And the whole film was about the dichotomy of Connecticut, that there still is very much a class system in effect. And that was something, because my relatives were Italian, and I spent a lot of time in New York and Queens, and there always was, a feeling here that that there were social outlets that the country clubs that you couldn't belong to, or the garden club, or there was an echelon of blue collar people, Italian Catholics who went to Catholic church, Protestants, there were, and then there was the Pratt and Whitney people, people that worked at the airport, the insurance industry. And we were all in this very tiny state. And what I thought that The Swimmer did was, that was the first time I actually said, oh, okay. And this is a short story written by John Cheever. He was specifically writing about the upper echelons of Connecticut and what they call the bourgeoisie that moved in. So you had old money, which is an interesting social genre in itself. You have old money, and then you had the 60s new money that moved in, and that's what The Swimmer was about. And that was something I observed, when I was a child. So that was the first sort of film. But then, as I grew up, again, as I said, it pops up. You see a movie like Mame, and the character says she's an Aryan from Darien, and that became people's perception of Connecticut. When I said I'm from Connecticut, oh, Connecticut, and they have an assumption, and that fascinated me because I said, well, I live in Connecticut. And I always had a New York accent because I spent so much time in New York. So people used to always think I was from New York. And I would say, I'm from Connecticut. I'm a preppy, and that never, it didn't, nobody from Connecticut ever thought I was from Connecticut, which was kind of funny in itself. But each time I would see a movie like that, it fascinated me. And then in my own career, when I would do movies, as an inside joke, I would throw that my character was from Connecticut. I just, because I thought it was funny, it pops up here and there. But it began, as writing the essay. I mean, I'm skipping around a bit, but then cut to many years later. So this is percolating in my head. And I wrote an essay about The Swimmer for Trailers from Hell.
Ah, yes.
And it really kind of took hold. People were really fascinated by it. And that's when I thought, maybe there's a book in here. And originally I was going to write about movies, all of Suburbia. But as I kind of drilled down, and I saw, wait a minute, there's these sex comedies, and they only take place in Connecticut. And what I always like to do, I always like to take the left path in anything I do. And I thought, no one's ever written seriously about sex comedies as a genuine genre.
Right.
And there were many of them in the 60s. There wasn't like one or two sex comedies. There was quite a few, and the majority of the sex comedies all take place in Connecticut.
Yes.
And so if you could trace a line from the sex comedies to a very serious film like The Ice Storm, it's basically the same movie, except that it's a serious take on the very same subject.
Right.
And so that's what fascinated me. It was always like, why would people put these sex comedies in Connecticut versus Ohio? I mean, I'm sure the same things were going on, but there was something very believable for the moviegoer to believe, like, yeah, they're all drinking and sleeping with each other's wives, and but again, there is an element of that that is true. And in the book, I trace this back from these 1930s movies, 40s, 50s, and then how we get to the 60s and these sex comedies.
And was it, because I counted about just over 90 movies that
Yeah.
you write about in the book. How did you go about choosing? Was it just kind of, I'm sure some things were easy to come to, like The Swimmer, but did you discover a lot more movies and watch a lot more, or how did you narrow it down?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I saw well over 100 films,
Right.
and I didn't want to do a book that was, IMDb's ultimate guide to Connecticut.
Yeah.
And yet I wanted to try to honor, like, oh, okay, yes, Crystal Skull, yes, they did shoot. It's like a huge movie, and yes, they used New Haven very briefly. And that was the challenge, was how do I include those films? Because again, very much like with my acting, it was very important to have a through line. And originally I thought, okay, I'm going to do 50 movies, because it was really a cinematic road trip through the state, explaining Connecticut and the perception of Connecticut. But as I delved in, I kept discovering films. And so again, a fascinating film called Come to the Stable, which I never had heard of, which is based on a completely true story of these French nuns moving to Bethlehem, Connecticut, simply because it was called Bethlehem, and opening an abbey. And then that's where Sister Dolores Hart, who is a former actress
Oh,
and
right. Who was in the
member of
Elvis
the
films.
yes, member of the Academy, and she's there. So, you say, okay, well, I have to include that. So I would write it and then say, okay, now where do I include it in the different genre in each chapter? So there's historical, there's true crime, there's horror. And so that I decided that fit in the historical. But there was a few movies, and it was just my criteria that I thought, I don't want to include a movie that's not very good just to include it, because that's not, I felt like that was, so cheating. As I said, that wasn't in my through line. So as I approached over 90, I thought, well, okay, I guess I could reach 100 movies just to say I reached them. But then you're writing about a movie that isn't very good, and that was, in a couple cases, that was tough. I dropped some films just because I thought, okay, yeah, maybe they did the interiors here, but is that really worthy of the story of Connecticut? And then in
Mm.
other instances, there's films, for example, there's a film which I think is an excellent, very dark film, which I almost included in horror, but then I put it in the dark Suburbia Redux, is the film Good Fences by Ernest Dickerson, which was filmed entirely in Canada for Showtime. But I thought it was a fascinating study because it's about a Black family that moves to Connecticut
Oh,
and is
yes.
trying to assimilate, for it with disastrous results. And I
Mhm.
just thought that Danny Glover and Whoopi Goldberg were so good, and Monique is also in the film.
Right.
Uh, and, and I just thought their acting was so terrific, and it's a movie that really needs to be re-examined.
Mm.
Sometimes movies, I gravitate towards movies if maybe no one's ever heard of them and they need a second look, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to put this movie in, just, I know it is based on a real thing, and okay, I'll throw it in there. But that I find that harder to do. I'll give you another example. It's not a very good movie. It's called My Soul to Take. But it's a Wes Craven film, and I work with Wes Craven, and I included another Wes Craven movie called The House on the Left.
Right.
And so therefore, for me as a writer, it makes sense. It bookends you know, that it bookends that he was here, yet he did another film that was supposedly about Connecticut, but filmed it in Louisiana. You know, he did a remake of The House on the Left, but that
Right.
was filmed in Louisiana. So I didn't include it. So, you know, there's always going to be people that, oh, she didn't include this or that.
Yeah. There's,
So
yeah.
it's purely subjective. And I tried to write that in the introduction. This is my cinematic road trip through the state to
Right.
give you a sense of the state. And then, but these to me are the best,
Mhm.
examples. Oh, one more example I'll give you, because I did a chapter called Connecticut Cameos, in which how do I fit in a film here that, and that's where I have, you know, Harrison Ford, the Crystal Skull, the Indiana Jones movie, because it was filmed in New Haven and Essex, parts of it. But I included a movie called The Other, simply because I think it's an incredible movie. I really, really, it's a very underseen horror film with Uta Hagen, who is a very famous
Oh,
actress.
yes.
And in they state that it's Connecticut in the film, but they actually filmed it in California. But Tom Tryon, who was the writer, attended Yale, and so I said, okay, in my mind, you know, it's my book. I get to write the rules. I said, it's a movie I love. I selfishly love this movie. I want more people to see it. He did go, you know, he was born in Connecticut, and he went to Yale, and he wanted to shoot it in Connecticut, and he wrote the book, and it is based on the shore of Connecticut.
Mhm.
But yet ultimately they ended up making it in California, but I included it under Connecticut Cameos.
Well, yeah, see, again, I mean, that's what I love so much about a great film book is that there are so many films you talk about that I hadn't even heard of, and like you said, things that deserve a second look. So again, my letterbox watch list is now enormous. Like, even I was ashamed to say, I think you saw, like, I posted it on Twitter, which is now called X.
Yes.
Mr. Blandings builds his dream home, and I was like, I had never, and I love Cary Grant and classic Hollywood. I was like, how do I not know this? And I loved it. I was laughing hysterically through it. And as someone from you know, a big city from Toronto, like, and you know, it's often small spaces, I could relate. My wife and I were watching it. We were howling, you know, in the shower, you know, sharing the washroom, then you're trying to shave and the steam on the mirror, and I, you know, wanting more space.
Yeah. It's it's an unbelievable movie. And again, I try to write in the movie because, you know, I had a theory about this, but as I was writing and doing research, and you can see in the book, the movie was so successful
Yeah.
that they actually sold kit houses of the movie house, which wasn't a real house. It was just like, you know, three walls.
Right.
And as I go into detail, they actually created plans for this house and sold the plans around the country to builders so that you could have a house just like Cary Grant and Myrna Loy. It was one of the first, to my knowledge, product placement films from beginning to end. I mean, there's
Yes.
product placement all over the film. And when
Yes.
the film ended, I mean, I could have done a whole book on Mr. Blandings with the
Mm,
advertisements. I chose to use an advertisement of Kellogg's cereal, but
Kellogg's, right.
they did carpeting, silverware, plates,
Right.
curtains, you know, as seen in Mr. Blandings. It was unbelievable. And as I said, they went around the country. My grandfather, you know, there was a radio show of him, and it was, the Blandings house is filled with groceries from, you know, Smith grocery store, and everything was an advertisement. And they sold an idyllic move to the country that I really think worked. And it was based on a movie. And
Mm,
that kind of fascinated me, and that's why that's such a cornerstone of the book, because I think people saw the movie, they said, yeah, let's get out of the city, let's get a country house, and they created Suburbia.
Right.
And then once Suburbia was created, then all the movies after Blandings, as we get into the 50s, we start to become, oh, I'm trapped in Suburbia now.
Yes.
It gets worse and worse and worse until we eventually get to the Stepford Wives, which is the ultimate, there's the Suburbia is, filled with monsters.
Well, I love that, right? Because it's always, grass, it's the sort of grass is greener sort of mentality, right? Like we think one thing is really, really great, and maybe there are great things about it, but once we're there, then we get into dark suburbia.
Yeah.
And then we see the other side of that lifestyle. And another one that I had been meaning to see for a while, and I finally saw what you talk about, is Loving with George Segal
Yes.
and Eva Marie Saint. And
what'd you
wow,
think?
I loved it. I mean, I really liked it, but it's truly dark. I mean, there's no hope.
No, I would love to see that film with an audience.
Yes, me too.
The ending, and I write about that film, and again, I compare it to a film like The Ice Storm, and you have this dichotomy that here's a film from the 70s that might be even darker than a contemporary film that is about the 70s. And right. I just found that kind of interesting. But yeah, that is a very, very dark film, boy.
Yes, it really is. I kept thinking, there's going to be some hope, some change, something, but it never happens. And I think, George Segal, he has just this likable quality. Like, you just can't hate him.
Yeah.
Because I always have really loved him. And he's so self-destructive, and the need to get out of, I suppose he felt that he had conformed in some way and just to suburbia. And he was trying subconsciously to destroy it every step of the way. And then that last scene, I'm like, what are you doing? It's so embarrassing. Not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I love movies when you're watching something that is both funny and tragic and sad, and that the ending, I'm having so many different feelings that it's unbelievable to me. But
it'd be a great movie. I mean, again, reminds me of, those great movies in the 70s. It just ended.
Yeah.
Like,
just okay.
Wow. You'd have to go out for a cup of coffee and just, talk about it. But again, what's so interesting about the movie for me in terms of Connecticut is going back to Blandings. You have Cary Grant sitting at the table with his 2 kids, with his wife, and they want, they're in Connecticut and they found this happiness. Cut to George Segal in Loving. The film opens, breakfast, and he's in hell. He's got a beautiful wife. He's got 2 beautiful children, and they don't know he has a mistress.
Yes.
And as soon as he gets on the train, he starts drinking. And so I was fascinated about this idea of how did suburbia in the movies go from being idyllic to dark? And is there any truth to this narrative?
Yeah, it's that thing, because I grew up in the suburbs, and it's that thing of very much people wanting to keep up with appearances and to look great and look at this house, and it's this superficial feel. I'm not saying that everybody's so awful, but there is this feeling of needing to please others, and look great at all costs. And I think that was maybe where some of his suffering came from, right? And his need to sort of self-destruct. Yes, exactly.
Destroy the American family.
Right.
And it's really, and again, another little, tiny little note for film buffs. What I started to notice through rewatching, again, when you have a theme in mind and now you're watching the movie and you're seeing, okay, there are these themes. in Mr. Blandings, the kids are very verbal,
Mm,
and they're oh, Dad, you don't know anything, and Dad, that's so this and that. By the time again we get to Loving, children don't, they have no, they don't speak. They're they're always shoved off to the side. They're not important anymore. The whole idea of your wife and your children are that they are a prison.
right,
you know? And
right,
I found that, and oftentimes in these, and Loving is in the 70s, but this begins to happen in the 60s sex comedies, where the parents are always having these cocktail parties and you never see the kids. They're like shoving them, they're always off away somewhere.
right, right.
Or they're used, in one particular movie, which is called My Six Loves, it's a sex comedy with Debbie Reynolds, the kids are used as props. They're actually their uncle. She has a country house and discovers that, how cute, 6 kids are living living in a shack on her property, and they
Right.
have no parents, and their uncle is says he'll sell them to her, like
Right.
it's like a joke. The kids they're just disposable.
Right.
And I found that fascinating,
Yes.
because in many ways in my childhood, I grew up in the 70s, that's what we felt like it was the me generation for the parents, but as a kid you were kind of left to your own devices.
Right. Seen and not heard kind of
Exactly.
thing. Yeah. Or maybe not even seen or heard.
Yeah.
It's the total, because I've noticed watching, because I have a son who's 11, and we'll watching a lot of family movies. And what I've noticed often with a lot of the formulas in family movies is similar to those dark suburbia, in terms of like the father who's obsessed with work and is neglecting his family. But then, of course, it's that very conventional change of he sees the errors of his ways and he
Right.
becomes and I was like, he becomes a better father. And I thought, well, why do I keep seeing this story with these it's the same thing, which is, I mean, it's obviously optimistic. And I just thought, wow, you
Yeah.
look at these dark suburbia and it just takes that, it destroys it.
Yeah, when
you
you
know?
see them all together,
Yeah.
that's when it really becomes powerful. And then that's what I tried to do in the book, was build the suspense like a movie, where it starts to get darker and
Mm,
darker and darker and darker until we're in horror movie land.
right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I loved it. Cause like I said, it's got so much and so many different touches of from everything. One thing I wanted to ask about your grandfather, Melvin Douglas, who was in some of these films you discussed. Another one was Theodora Goes Wild,
Yes.
which I really really like. But I never realized that Richard Boleslawski directed films, because I knew he was in the
Yes.
Moscow Art Theater and that he taught in New York. I mean, he taught all the people that everyone then wanted to study with, like
Yeah.
Strasberg, right? And Harold Clurman in the group theater. I had no idea he made films. And you talked about that your grandfather learned from him with the way he was making things much more realistic for them. Did he ever mention that changed anything to his approach to acting after working with him? Did he ever mention anything
Well,
about
he
that?
gave me, I'm trying to think, it's on my bookcase. He gave me 6. Wait, I'm gonna
Yeah,
give
go
me
ahead. I
to
can
see if
edit this.
I can find it here. Find it, my many books. Oh, here it is. I lucked out.
There we go.
Douglas leaves the frame to get a book. It's my favorite thing. So see,
Oh yes, his book. Yes.
now again, when you write a book like this, it's got 300 photographs. This almost made the book. Um, so this was a book that my grandfather gave me.
Oh wow.
When I told him I wanted to be an actor. Now I had no idea that Richard Boleslawski directed Theodora Goes Wild, But
Yes.
so here's this book. It sold for $2.75.
There we go.
Um, but my grandfather gave me this book, you know, as I later, and this is the Stanislavski method. But as I got old, as you know, again, as I started writing about movies and getting interested, I said, oh, okay, so there's this connection of Stanislavski with that movie. And that's why I think that movie stands out to me, is that it's not a screwball movie that is like Bringing Up Baby, which I also write about,
Yes,
which is
yes.
very heightened. The acting in it is extremely real.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And that's what I really love about it. There's so many scenes of them where it almost feels like they're improving, you know, they're just really, they're very, very loose. And it doesn't feel, I mentioned a scene in the movie where they go out berry picking, and she takes these berries and
Oh, yes.
shoves them all over his face. And he's kind of laughing, he's choking, you know, and I'm thinking, this is not something a normal, you know, movie star would let himself look, you know,
Right.
look messed up like that. But the idea of the transformation, that movie is about, that was these country, I call them country living comedies,
Mhm.
where his father is a banker and he wants him to be a banker, and he wants to be an artist, you know, a graphic, he designs book covers, and he meets Theodora, who's posing as she lives in this small town in Connecticut, and is posing, and is, you know, on Sunday plays the organ in the church, but she writes, you know, sexy novels. And so he's trying to get her to break out of her shell. But the flip on it is that you find out that he is also imprisoned in a way, because
Yes.
it comes from this wealthy family, and he's married, he's in a loveless marriage. But it's when he comes to Connecticut and spends time with real people and does real things like going fishing and berry picking, he sees, aha, there's a better way to live.
Hmm.
And what I found fascinating about that film in particular was going back to Boleslavsky in the 1930s in Brookfield, Connecticut, where they had a camp where all of these people, and that was one of the most wonderful surprises of the book, is okay, Elia Kazan, Arthur Miller, you know, Boleslavsky, they were in Connecticut in
Yes.
the 30s. They were coming from New York. They were rehearsing plays that changed the American, you know,
Mhm.
theater. And they were in this idyllic place of Connecticut. And therefore, this idea of transformation is actually based on truth. It's not a
Right.
Hollywood, it's not a completely made up Hollywood fantasy. It is actually based on that the best creative, you know, you find out who you are when you are away from the city, when you're away from the rules of society. And I think that still holds true
Mhm.
today. And that was again one of the things I set out with in the book.
Oh, it certainly holds true. I mean, I could relate because I'm, you know, again, from a big city, but my wife is from the country in Nova Scotia. So we visit, and every time I visit, I'm like, I cannot get used to this. But then
Right, right.
gradually you start to find a real connection to nature and
Yes.
peace. And I'm doing things that I've never done before in my life, like you mentioned, like
Yes.
fishing and boating. And I'm like, who would have thought in my life that I would have ever have done these things? But it's a whole other way of living. But you're right, it is very, people do it. It's a very real
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And once in all of these country living comedies, and you have In Name Only with Cary Grant, Bringing Up Baby, Theodora Goes Wild, once they experience country living, they cannot go back
Right,
to the
exactly.
way they
Yeah.
used to be.
Right.
And that's quite a statement when you see them all on top of each other
Hmm. Hmm.
in that way. And again, this was what was really happening. You had actors on Broadway doing plays in the 30s, and they were, they were driving out to the country and they were getting inexpensive country houses. And
Right.
so there was this germ of, I think, of truth in it.
Hmm.
It's just, it was fascinating.
Well, what I thought was so interesting about that film is they're both so tied to what their family think, and of course they help each other to become individuals and to step
Yeah.
into who they really are. But I like that it doing it as more of a screwball. It wasn't a conventional way of changing where it kind of comes from something inwards. Like they both put themselves in positions where they had to do it. And I just thought, yeah, because it is so hard to change in life. And often conventional films make it look easy. And what I liked was like, oh, wow, they show how hard it is to do this and to go against the
Yeah.
grain, right? I thought, wow, that was really unique.
And I also thought that what is the other side of it that is fun, which again was so much a part of the 30s that we don't really have anything like this today, is it's that it's a social comedy. It's poking fun both at the uptight New Yorkers and the Yankees, who
Right.
are always in everybody's business and don't want anything to change, and I love that whole idea, of it, and that it's fun. The social mores of a small town,
Hmm.
which again still exists today,
Yeah.
where everybody knows your business and
Yes.
everybody, oh,
Yes.
look at her, look at that. You
Yeah.
see what she's wearing in church, and all of that.
Yes, exactly. Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. It still holds up. But again, another discovery from the book that I hadn't heard of. One thing I wanted to ask you is, from writing a memoir, I Blame Dennis Hopper, and now a film history book, what were some of the biggest challenges between the two?
Well, I still want to get back to, there was a couple other ideas I had to write about movies, but then when COVID hit, and I found myself, I was in Los Angeles,
Right.
and I had written the essay on the swimmer, and I just started, I had all this free time, and I wasn't tied to writing about anything other than something I wanted to write about. I didn't have, I wasn't going to do a book proposal. I said, I just want to write something that has always fascinated me and see where it takes me. And then the more I started to write about it, the more I thought, okay, there actually is a book in this. I would say the biggest challenge is to remember that it's not a memoir, and that although it's my stories and my experience, and you're in the car with me, it's a cinematic road trip.
Right.
I I walked a very careful line of not talking about my own movie experiences,
Right.
except for one very specific chapter where I talk about a movie that I'm very proud of called The Green,
Oh,
which was
yes, at the end of the book, right.
yes, and that fit in with the idea of again, coming home. It was the first, gay film that was made in Connecticut, and I even include some of the strange headlines.
Yes.
Like, this was such an oddity to do this thing, and which is now completely acceptable. But so I think, and then I tell, and told a couple of anecdotes about my grandfather, boxed them off, and a story about Frank Perry. But that was
Yes.
the biggest challenge, is always to remember, this is me doing another thing which I love, which is just talking about movies.
Mhm, mhm. I love that. I love that you're on the chapter on the green, your mother was bringing lasagna to the set, and because I'm Italian myself, so
Yeah,
I could see my family doing something like that. Not that
I,
I don't think my mother would have done that, but
yeah,
it's very Italian, that's for sure. I
it
love
was
that.
just yeah, it was, she insisted on driving me to the set,
Yeah.
insisted, and like gave me little bagged lunches, and
I love that.
It was fun. So yeah, we had that was a real it was a great experience. And Guilford is just an incredible town. And part of the other thing with the book is the balance of writing about movies and writing about the town and the history of the town and giving people almost a snapshot
Yeah.
of these different towns. Whenever I would do movies all over the world, I'm always out sightseeing and going. I'm always shocked. And, I'm the only one going to if I have a day off. I remember shooting a movie in Iowa and I was like, okay, I'm going to Missouri today. And
Right. To
I
discover
go see
things.
where, Jesse James's house. And people always go, God, that's so funny. And this is amazing. Like get to see all these places. So I very much wanted to do a book that when people would read it, they would say, oh, I want to go. I really want to go there. I want to see that tobacco field in Windsor,
Yes.
or, I want to go to the Guilford Green, which she's talking about, or I want to go to Chester. Did you feel that at all? Where
I did. Yeah. I was thinking I want to go. I was telling my wife, I was like, we got to go. We got to go to, well, my cousin lives there. I'm not sure exactly which city, but I was like, wow, we got to go sometime because I mean, it got me really, really interested in the state. But I also, I like that you were talking about like, industries that came and gone and stuff like that. One thing I was curious about with the essays on the films, did you also look at it like almost like a film review? Because sometimes you were making like interpretations and opinions and they felt like reviews. Was that a conscious choice, or I was curious about that?
Yes, I mean, to me, the key to writing is always rewriting. It's like you write and watch the movie, I make notes, I write about it, I write about it again. I don't think of, I'm not here to be a movie critic. I'm a movie goer. And so I try
Right.
to create the perception of the movie, but again, maybe have my own ideas because I'm a film buff, and try to translate those to people like, oh, you may not have noticed this thing. An example of this is probably, again, one of my favorite essays that I wrote is Stanley and Iris,
Oh, yes, yes.
which is a movie. It's sort of a forgotten movie. People go, oh yeah, I didn't think it was very
I
good.
love that movie.
Yeah, De Niro's performance in it
Yeah,
was
Jane Fonda,
incredible.
so good.
But what I try to do, and I don't know if this is like it's not a critique, which is I look at it from a different perspective. I looked at it from the perspective of Waterbury. So the essay opens with Death of a Salesman, and Arthur Miller, that the first line in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman is Willie Loman talking about Waterbury.
Yes.
And 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 I said, bingo, like and it sort of crystallizes for me what Waterbury used to be, this industrial town that made, clocks and watches and brass buttons that were in Gone with the Wind. And now it's all it is a shell. It's like brick. It is abandoned factories.
Yes.
And there's a sadness and a heaviness to it when you compare it to its heyday. And I wrote about the film that that is the perspective. That it's like this, the end of and that's why they chose Waterbury, is they were looking for the director said, I was looking for an abandoned town
Yes.
with an abandoned feeling.
Mm.
And Stanley and Iris are two people that feel abandoned. And
Right.
so therefore did shooting in Waterbury probably, did that essence seep its way into the film. And so that is I find a perspective to write about in the film. And that idea of it's It's about Stanley and Iris, but it's also about all the people that came to Waterbury and worked in all these factories that are no longer there.
Right. Yeah, that really I'm always fascinated by that as well. Like, industries that come and go, and a town that may have been like because you even mentioned like, restaurants would be open like so late because people in the factories were working all kinds of shifts. And so,
Yeah.
and now it's like an abandoned city. So again, that was really fascinating to me. But you said something interesting about De Niro here that I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about. You said some of my favorite De Niro performances, for example, in Bang the Drum Slowly and Awakenings, use his own inability to communicate easily. Is that from you having known him that you found something about that he has trouble with communicating, or something that comes through in those parts in Stanley
Well,
and Iris?
it's always so interesting because again, in my career, as this kind of insider outsider perspective, I'm a kid watching Robert De Niro. I remember seeing Bang the Drum Slowly actually on a double bill at the drive-in. And I mean, I loved it
Yeah, it's a
so
great
much
movie. Yeah.
that I, you know, I went to see it like again and again. Just it was just so incredibly sad, and
Mm,
and I loved Awakenings. Those are more my. I mean, you have guys who love Heat and Capone and some of the and
yeah,
I,
the tough guys. Yeah, De Niro is
exactly.
known for, right.
And some of my favorite performances of his are again that inability to communicate. And then yes, when I work, with Mr. De Niro, you see that same uh that how he fuses that inability to communicate
Mm,
into something. But the movies that I did with him, Cape Fear and Goodfellas, are the more larger than life persona.
right.
And yet, so my observations are both acting with him, but then watching him on screen, and I pick up on that the when he says in Stanley and Iris, he finally brings out the words and he says, "Teach me to read." He can almost barely get the words out. Now, my observation is, again, as Mr. De Niro, that as his acting, that there's something in there. I don't exactly know what that is, but it is so difficult for him to communicate that
Mm,
when
mm,
he does communicate, there is a surge of emotion
mm.
that goes through him that hits me as a moviegoer and clearly hits Jane Fonda in that scene.
Yes.
And for me, as a moviegoer, I don't know about you, but we so seldom in movies anymore get that rush of like, where watching the movie, everything now seems like, steady, goes along. And in the old days, movies had these emotional surprises.
Right.
And you'd have to catch your breath. You'd be in the movie theater going, I hope no one sees me crying. But that's one of those movies for me. It's just one of my favorite
Yes.
movie moments. And I that's my observation about him that I think is true.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, I've seen him in person a couple. I worked in a theater here in Toronto where we had a manual elevator and like it was from like the early 1900s. So someone has to operate it. And during the Toronto Film Festival, he came in my elevator. My heart was pounding because I love the guy. And he was, his wife at the time. If my impression, anyways, he was clutching onto her like that attention, like from everyone. He was just the shyness came
Yes.
through, and of course, someone called out to him, "Hey, Bob, you talking to me?" And he rolled his eyes like, "Oh my, I wish I had gotten a photograph." But even in interviews, like the shyness really comes through. And I know people who know him well have said he's very, very funny in life and
Yeah.
stuff. But I can see that, you know, and you're right, in those parts like Stanley and Iris Awakenings, that he has this side to him that is so shy, and it's
Bang the
beautiful
drum
to see.
slowly,
Bang the
yeah.
drum slowly, yeah.
That is almost more powerful. I mean, of course, he's always, you know, one of the greatest actors
Yes.
that we have. But I don't think anyone has ever pinpointed that is for me, they're more upsetting. They're like Bang the Drum
Oh
Slowly,
yeah. Oh God, yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Sting and Iris,
Hmm.
and that as and if there were a director that was more perceptive, they could tap into
Yes.
that side of him too.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, I could see, I mean, Martin Ritt, such a great filmmaker. I can see how he could have utilized that side of him. And one thing you pointed out about De Niro is that he's one of the major stars who's worked in Connecticut the most. I thought, who would have thought? Because again, you think New York, you know, New York is De Niro,
Oh,
and
yes, you bring up another just completely forgotten film, which is Jackknife.
Jackknife. Jackknife's brilliant. Yeah.
Just an incredibly overlooked
Oh, so overlooked, and a great
film.
play too. The play is great too.
Yes.
But I love
And
that. Yeah, Ed Harris, everyone's fantastic in that.
yes, so I was very, very happy to include that.
Well, you wrote an interesting list here. You said essential Connecticut films to watch before people read the book, and
Yes.
Jackknife's on there. So we got Jackknife, Rachel, Long Day's Journey into Night, The Swimmer, Gentleman's Agreement, Boomerang, Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream, House, Parish, Strangers on a Train, and Christmas in Connecticut. So what is it about, you know, not to go into every single one, but what is it about these 10 that you feel would help readers before they read the book?
It was so hard just to, well, first of all, it was just to show the amount of genres of films
Right.
that all are central to Connecticut. It was so hard to pick. Like, do I just do 5? Do I do, you know, I'm so enthusiastic about movies that I want people to see the movies and then, you know, be able to talk about it. But some of it has to do with, I don't think people realize their association with Connecticut. For instance, A Long Day's Journey into Night, which was written by Eugene O'Neill. His family, you know, lived in New London, and the whole film is about New London and is about his father who bought a house called it Monte Cristo. And New London is just, again, just an incredibly fascinating city. In its heyday, it had all these great casinos, and Eugene O'Neill frequented these. He saw both the heyday of New London, and he wrote Wilderness, and then he saw the destruction of New London, and there were fires, and there was this famous Pequot Hotel, which was burned to the ground, and he saw his father's house go into disarray, and then he wrote Long Day's Journey into Night. And so I said, oh my God, no one's ever put together that he basically wrote A Wilderness and Long Day's Journey into Night are about the same town.
Yeah, I never knew that.
Same house.
Right. Yeah.
And it's Connecticut, you know. So that's why I thought it was essential. The reason I chose Strangers on a Train is that, again, although the film takes place in the movie in what they call Metcalf, I think it's Maryland. Metcalf is actually Danbury, and they filmed a lot of the scenes in Danbury at the train station. And he specifically chose, just like he chose in Shadow of a Doubt, chose an area of Northern California for the all-American town. He specifically chose Danbury as this town. That's where his wife lives. That's where she's murdered. When he goes into the record shop, that's all Danbury. The fair there, the Danbury Fairgrounds used to be like a really, really big deal for Danbury. So I thought it was, again, important to highlight what an impact, Hitchcock could have made his movie anywhere. He could have made it in New Jersey or Massachusetts, but he specifically chose Danbury as, again, the location for this horrible, horrendous murder. So I thought that said something, about Connecticut. So and then Boomerang is just, again, one of my.
Oh, that's great.
That
Yes.
that was based on a murder. It's still unsolved to this day. And I was like, maybe somebody could solve the murder. It happened in 1924, this murder of a priest. It was pinned on a soldier. He didn't do it, but because he was drunk and disorderly, they pinned this murder on him. And because it looked so bad that they couldn't solve this murder of a priest, that they pinned it on this guy. And then the DA switched sides. It was like it made his career. So I think I picked that film because it's central to, again, the kind of ethics that I think could only happen in Connecticut. Right. A certain moralistic fiber that maybe has been forgotten about.
That's a fascinating story that when you went through the true story, I thought, wow, talk about ethics and who the hell nowadays, I can't see a lawyer or a politician doing that.
Yeah, just for people that are wondering and they can see the movie, the district attorney who is pressured to solve this murder and put this guy away does his own investigation and determines that the police coerced his confession and stands up in court and utters his famous line, like, that it's just as important to, defend the innocent as it is the guilty, and switches sides and
yes,
gets the guy off. And it's like, again, you just think, wait a minute, did this really happen? This happened. Not only did it happen, but it happened in Connecticut. And I show a picture of the DA, and this whole story caught the eye of FDR, and he ended up becoming Attorney General. And so it's just it was a wow moment for me. Why doesn't anybody talk about this? And I think to me, it's the best. In the book, I try to represent, again, the best of what the state represents and the worst.
Right. Right.
And whether that in the worst is gentleman's agreement, where you have these covenants, that were in place to enforce, that to make sure that no, blacks or Jews or anybody ethnic that they didn't want in their society, that they had covenants, gentlemen's agreements to keep people out. So that's what I tried to show in this road trip, that's what's so great about going to a museum or a road trip. You uncover both the good and the bad.
Yes.
And you get a sense of what the state is about, where we came from and where we are today. But there's a lot to embrace and be proud of that I thought of, that I wanted to bring to the surface. And then there's things in the past that we need to recognize and say, hey, we still haven't gotten there.
Well, like I said, you did that so well and communicated it so seamlessly. One thing that I wanted to ask, which, because to me, you've been such an inspiration, because I'm also an actor, but I love to do so many other things, like this show, I teach and things like that, and I love film history like yourself. I was just curious, what was it like, because I know you worked for a publicist, and then you were still, you are an actor, but you've also worked with TCM and, like I said, the Criterion Channel and Trailers from Hell, and you're writing. Was that what was, just not that it was a transition, but what was it like? Like, how did it kind of come to be, like these different things you started to explore, or was it just, did it just kind of organically happen?
I think again, going back to my early days, working with Peggy Siegel, I always, and my grandfather was always over my shoulder. He always wanted me to be a writer, and
Right.
but of course I had the acting bug, and I wanted to be
Right.
show business, and but yet I found along the way that I love acting in movies, but I love there is a certain sense, early on in your career that you have to make a choice. You can't be a director or an actor. I mean, some people can pull it off. So I was always doing movies, and then there would be things that I wanted to do or direct that I would have to kind of put aside. And now I've found, the ability to do both really pleases me, because I always had this yen. Of course, I love movies. I mean, look at all these books. I always, in my
Right.
fantasy world, I always wanted to meet these people that I admire, and I love, of course, working with them and acting with them. But there's nothing like the experience of, sitting across from somebody like Jane Fonda
Mm.
and asking her questions about movies. This was like a woman who I admired, put up on a pedestal, was in every movie I saw as a kid,
Well, I love
and
your interview with her on Clute. You interviewed her, which was
yes,
such a great interview.
thank you, thank you. That was the second time I got to interview her. I interviewed her again when I had the series Trailblazing Women. So there, that tickles me too. So, I mean, maybe some people just want to be an actor, but I want to be able to do, we're here for this short amount of time,
Mm.
and I just want to do things that are, how do we remember all these great actors? How do we remember all these great movies? How do we bring to light maybe something that somebody hadn't thought about? I mean, my overall goal in my entire career is to celebrate the arts, and I wish we celebrated the arts a little bit more than we
Yes.
do as a country, in the way
Yes.
that you go to other countries and artists are really admired.
Mm.
A lot of our art has been diluted by social media, reality stars, and there doesn't seem to be, when I was growing up, as I said, we put these people on a pedestal. They're gods, these movie gods to us. And so I always want to kind of, celebrate them. And again, part of the reason of doing the book was my feeling like, wow, there's this whole genre of cinema, Connecticut cinema, that should be studied as Connecticut cinema
Hmm.
and discussed as Connecticut cinema.
Hmm.
Um, and nobody's ever done that before. And if I don't do it, nobody else
Yeah.
will do it.
Right.
That's always what I'm thinking. Like, well, if I don't do it, like, who's going to write? Who wants a book on Connecticut in the movies?
Right. Right.
Once you do it, I mean, that's what I always tell people too. If you have a good idea, you have to do it. You have
Hmm.
to follow through and do it. Because if
Hmm.
you don't do it, no, nobody else will. And once it's out there and done, I think there's a great sense of accomplishment.
Hmm. Was there any resistance from, if you were trying to work
Oh,
with TCM and stuff, not with this book, but just in like interviewing people in the past? Was anyone like, well, aren't you an actor, Ileana? Why do you want to do?
yeah,
Or
there's always that. I think there's always a bit of that. And again, that's what I was saying before. There never used to be, but I, I hate to quote myself, but it is a good funny line. Is when I did my web series, my character, who is sort of a hyper me, says it was fun to be famous when no one was famous, but now everyone is famous and I'm obsolete. And that
Right.
is, and that's, there was, when I first got into the movies and when I was working in publicity and, working, I mean, I was like a little office worker and, we were working with Barry Levinson and Norman Jewison and Brian De Palma and all these people. I mean, again, actors were like, oh, they were special, and somehow again, like they're not, actors and artists aren't considered as special as they were. And it used to be, going into acting was like going into the circus. You wanted to be an actor because you could express yourself in all these artistic ways, and we don't quite revere actors the way we used to. And I'm not really sure why that is. Now everybody feels they can act, and everybody feels they can write, and because they write a paragraph on Facebook, it's like, well, I'm a writer too. And it's not really the same. It's not really the same thing. But I hope that's again what I'm trying to do. But sometimes again, when I worked at Turner, you're always having to fight a little bit of like, well, you're just an actress, what do you know? And when you start to write books, I think people give you a little bit more street cred, and working with Trailers from Hell. They're kind of an elite group of gurus. I'm thrilled that they even involved me. But what I always like to say about my own, like, I'm not the film theory is not my bag. I am a film buff. That is my take, is like, I've seen all these, I've been watching movies from when I was a kid. I was around my grandfather, Melvin Douglas. I met all the people that were in his circle from the 30s and 40s. I read all the books he wanted me to read. I went to acting school, and then I worked with a large majority of these people, Christopher Walken and John Turturro, Steve Buscemi. These were my contemporaries, and so I was in the world, and then I'm also outside the world. And I always think that was my perspective of whenever I was working with anybody. And it's funny, who popped into my head was Kevin Costner, but we're doing Message in a Bottle. And half the fun for me is my brain goes, I'm acting in a movie with Kevin Costner, and that's really fun and amazing, and I'm having a great time. And then between takes, I'd say, now, Kevin, I heard
trivia time.
I go, now I heard that The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is your favorite movie. Now you explain to me. I go, that's really your favorite movie? Like, more than Shane, more than this, more than that. And I always had that ability. People would always say to me, God, only you could get away with that. And I was like, what? Get away with it? You're like, you have a way of talking to people and getting things out of them about their movies that maybe if an interviewer asked them, they would be put off by it. And it took me years to realize, like, oh, okay, that's actually a good trait for interviewing people. Yeah. But I'm genuinely curious.
Exact. That's the difference. Yes.
Right. And I genuinely know the movie. Now, I'm not saying, I'm not an interviewer who says, well, I read somewhere that.
Right.
Like, tell me why you did. I've seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 20 times. So I'm going to say, tell me what you like about that movie. There's a great moment in the interview with Jane Fonda with Clute, which again, I've seen, so many times. And I started saying, I go, oh, my favorite, I love the scene where you go late at night to seduce Donna Sutherland. She just like gets up in a chair. She goes, why do you like that scene? And like, why do you even like that scene? And it wasn't like, oh, I just prepped to have that question ready and then backed off of it. When I'm at home watching an interview, what drives me crazy is I go, where's the follow-up? Where's the
Right.
follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
They're saying something now in the moment and you're not following up.
Mm-hmm.
So when she did that, you have that jolt of like, oh my God, my idol, Jane Fonda. She's challenging my unique observation on the movie. But I was like, well, wait a minute. And and we really got into it. And then she goes, oh, okay. And then she relates, well, we had an affair during the
Yes,
movie.
that shocked me. I thought, holy, did she just say that?
I had the same reaction. I I was like, yes, you certainly did. But that to me is what makes an interview exciting for the audience. And it's
Right.
almost like you're in a scene with the person.
Yes. Yeah.
And it makes it interesting. And switching back now, my brain, I go back and forth. Switching back then to the Kevin Costner discussion, it's funny how it suddenly shifts. Now, I'm acting in a scene with Kevin Costner, and I'm obviously very respectful, and we're having a blast. But like else, he'll go, "Hey, did you see a movie?" And then now we're talking movies. And I'm like, I don't know what's more fun. I mean, now this is me. I don't know what's more fun, talking movies with Kevin Costner or acting in a scene with him. It's always been my dilemma because they're
Right.
incredibly fun and unique. So if I'm on a movie and I'm working with, again, like Billy Bob Thornton,
Mm.
what an amazing actor. And but in the back of my head, like a poker player, I'm like, when am I going to start asking him about
Yes, yes. Break the ice a little more.
and all the different things he did. And one of the most amazing things about Goliath, it was Dennis Quaid, Paul Williams, Beau Bridges.
Oh.
It was unbelievable. We were just sitting around just telling stories. The first thing I said to Dennis Quaid, that's all, again, going to be in a scene with Dennis Quaid. And I said, I got to tell you, I saw you in True West on Broadway
Ah.
with your brother. I said, I saw that show. I go, you guys were so good. I went to see it every night, and again, now some people say to me, oh, only you could get away with only you. I don't know if that's true, but we got into all sorts of discussions about Sam Shepard, about True West, about that limited run, because I said, obviously, I'd seen other people. I saw Gary Sinise and John Malkovich.
Malkovich, yeah.
I said, but there was something about the performance that you did with your brother. It was just so wild, and it was crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
I told him, which is totally true. I said, I have a sense memory that every time I smell toast, I think of you in True West, because the show opens and they're toasting bread. And but and then it leads to other discussions about other films that he did, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. But
Right.
you know,
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know if it's myself from doing this show, but I last year had a very tiny part in The Handmaid's Tale, which they shoot here in Toronto, and Elizabeth Moss is the director, and the similar thing, and the star. She was directing the episode, and I saw her in the West End years ago do the Children's Hour, and she walked by me and I just said, hey, I saw you in, and people probably go up to her, Mad Men. They talk about Mad Men and stuff. I just thought, I bet you no one ever asks her about this play she did 12
yeah,
years ago. And I could tell she was a little surprised. But yeah, then we talked about, Ellen Burstyn was in it and Carol Kane. And I thought, oh my God, you worked with Ellen Burstyn and Carol Kane. And she stopped to chat, and I don't know if it's from doing this show and and having a little more of that confidence because you're talking to people all the time about their work. But I mean, you probably have more of a natural knack for it than I do. I think I need
Well, I
You know?
think people sense if you have a genuine appreciation,
Yes,
you
exactly.
know,
Yeah.
for their work. And I watch so many movies and I love to talk about movies. And, not every actor is a movie aficionado,
Right,
but
right.
um, it's always fun when you can, be on the set and you're talking shop. And, for me, it's just so much fun because I,
Hmm.
I do feel like I'm, the rememberer in some ways. And you're like, this is it. This is they may be gone next week. And so it's a good opportunity
Hmm.
to find out. And I also like to be factual too, where if you sometimes you read stuff and you go, that's not exactly true. I actually work with a person. I asked them this question, or they're not really like that, or so I have both kind of hats
Hmm.
in that arena. you
Right. Yes. Well, yes, it certainly has. It sure certainly has a lot of advantages. How did you settle on the swimmer for the cover? Is that your favorite? Would you say in this
Yeah,
such a great cover? I love the cover.
I
It's so good.
when I was when I started to write the book, I just had a visual of what the cover was going to be. I just kept seeing it in my mind, and I said it's got to have the swimmer, and it's got to have this mid-century modern kind of graphics. And I didn't, and then we settled on what the colors were going to be. The colors echo a little bit the license plate of Connecticut, blue, what it used to be, which was blue. But
Hmm.
I think of this part. What I love about it is again it's such an evocative image with the legs, and you don't know who they belong to,
Right, right.
and you see the vista out in the back, and the colors, the yellow and the blue, and it's Burt Lancaster, who's so amazing. Who I love. I'm obsessed. I love Burt
Yeah,
Lancaster. He's
yeah.
one of
Me
my
too. Me too.
favorite actors. So it's an homage to him that I
Right.
get to have him on the cover, and hopefully he's
Yes.
happy about that. The harder part was, coming up with a title,
Right.
because I had the first thing I came up with was Connecticut in the Movies, and then went through 8,000 titles to only come
To
to
the
Connecticut in the
original
Movies,
idea.
to the original thing, which is usually first idea, best idea. And then, but it had, and then from Dream Houses to Dark Suburbia. Again, that it was the hardest part,
Right,
but
right,
I'm
right.
very happy with, what it turned out to be. But that,
Hmm.
because I said it, I want to tell a story again, and I want people to know um, that this is going to be a journey. Like with
Hmm.
everything I do, this is a journey. We're going to go from dream houses to get to very dark,
Right.
and that's what's going to make it fun to read. And you can read it from the very beginning and take that road trip with me. That's always how I would suggest is the best thing,
Hmm.
because as you read, as I laid out the book, I'm very conscious of the journey of the whole book. As we start, it starts with William Gillette building a castle along the river in East Haddam. And he played, he created the persona of Sherlock Holmes that we now
Hmm.
associate with Holmes, which is, the pipe
Yeah.
and the cape. So begins with that, and then we get to Mr. Blandings, which is basically it's about a man's castle, and then how houses in suburbia become prisons, and then how you move to the country and you buy an old house and it turns out to be haunted and there are zombies living in it, and how this all has occurred in the span of one state.
Yes. It's quite the trip.
No, yeah, no other state has had so many transformations.
Mm.
And I find that to be fascinating.
Hmm. I understand. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Do you have
I was
another
just
thought?
going to say, and this image to me is like light and dark.
Yes.
It's festive, but there's something very dark about it.
Yeah, holding up the legs, you're thinking, what's going on here, right? You know, unless
Exactly.
if it's because I mean I know the film, but for someone who doesn't know the film, it's a little like what that can mean so many things.
And it's also about, again, the misconception of Connecticut, which I want to explore too. The perception of the movies, and then the reality of, as you open a cover, and then we're going to go into a road trip, and you're like, oh, okay, I thought it was this, which again I do with my acting. I thought it was this one, thought she was going to do this one thing, but now wait a minute, she's led me down this road, and I'm learning about Sherlock Holmes. How did that happen?
Well, and that's another thing. Like, it's not just like older films. Like these films are still being made. Like a modern one that I really like that I didn't know was totally didn't dawn on me was Connecticut. Was like Rachel getting married, which the Demi film, and that's so good. I mean, that I watched it again the other night, and I was like, wow. I remember when it came out, but people were mostly talking about Anne Hathaway and stuff like that. But I was like, yeah, but overall, like, not just her. This is like a fantastic movie. So relatable too.
Yeah, what I spent a lot of time on that movie, and again, we're going back to like, are you a movie critic? Are you writing about it critically? I'm watching the movie with fresh eyes, and I go, okay, what's my take on this movie? My take on this movie is that it is doing what now everybody is doing, which is the camera's very fluid.
Yes.
You're invited to this wedding that you think is going to be very happy and joyful, turns out to be a nightmare. The family is
I love that.
The family is completely dysfunctional.
Yes.
And you're right, when the film came out, there was an emphasis on Anne Hathaway, but as years go by and I get to rewatch the film, you get to see that he was doing something before anybody else was doing it.
Yes,
And now this is when you look at any, Amazon television show, Netflix television show, what they're doing there is where it all kind of began. He broke the mold there.
Yeah, and of course that's like the early days of, well, maybe more mainstream filmmakers using digital cameras. I don't know if I think back then was like the red camera was, I don't know what they used probably.
This is one of the first movies to use the red camera.
It was the red. I thought so. Yeah. No, that's great. I was like, wow, maybe more people need to talk about that film because it's really, really wonderful. I understand that you're hoping for more tax incentives to come into the state for
definitely
will inspire that.
I want the book to be a blueprint for, again, people to reinvest in the arts in Connecticut. Again, you can see what, there's this treasure trove of locations, subject matter. That's why I put it all in one book. It's like these are things you could do documentaries. There's at least 10 subjects in here that could be covered that you could do a documentary about, do a movie about. And I want to start, I want to start filming here, bring more people to the state. People have a misunderstanding again of tax incentives. Obviously in Canada, where I film a lot of things, there's such tremendous tax incentives that's why everybody makes
that's
movies.
Why it's called Hollywood North, Toronto.
Right. And I think that, again, our proximity to New York, and there's so many places. Pennsylvania now has incredible tax incentives, and people are shooting films there, television shows there. And I think that Connecticut is just, they're missing the boat. They're really missing the boat. On this. And I think that, again, this is a blueprint to say, oh, okay, we are a film community. We don't think of ourselves as a film community, but look at all these great movies that have come, out of Connecticut.
Oh God, absolutely. So many. And you're doing some signings coming up,
I have, yeah, I've got
yeah.
a big, I'm going to be doing signings throughout the state. The biggest one is going to be, I'm going to be at the Kate Theater, which is the Katharine Hepburn Theater in
Yes.
Old Saybrook. That's November 15th. And I'm sitting down with the Colin McEnroe, who's an NPR radio host here, and signing books for a ticket. For the ticket price, you get a book that I get to
Yes.
sign.
That's a great deal.
Yeah, for God's sakes, Christmas. And I'll be doing signings throughout the state, and I'm going heading to Chicago and Los Angeles and all
Oh.
over. Maybe I'll get to go back to Canada once the
Oh,
strike is
please
over.
do. Yeah, that would be
I was
great.
in last year. I was in Winnipeg.
Ah,
Uh, I don't know if I would recommend going to Winnipeg
in the winter especially.
in January, but
Yeah.
I made it, and it was really fun. Beautiful city.
It must have been, God, what, 20 below zero or more?
Yeah, and we were shooting outside too.
Yeah. Oh my
I was
God.
I was like, no, we're not going to shoot outside. And they were like, of course we are.
They
Cold
don't have a
enough, cold enough for you.
right. Yeah, they don't have a choice there.
Yeah.
Is there a page where all those appearances coming up are? Is there
Yes.
like okay.
Yes. Thank you for prompting me. My Facebook. God, I'm on social media. My Facebook page, Connecticut in the Movies, and then also my regular page, which is Ileana Rama on Instagram and Twitter. But the Facebook page, Connecticut in the Movies, which you can join and be eligible for free gifts. I'm giving out like little freebies for people who post their.
I love it.
Yeah, I've sent out a couple already. People are shocked. I got this thing in the mail she sent me. I'm like, well, look at my office. I have things to give away. But yeah, they can see all the different events which are happening. And
Great.
there's also a big push in Connecticut for me to do readings at libraries. And there's about
Oh, wow.
6 libraries lined up. Again, I feel like it as an author, libraries sort of get overlooked in terms of
Yes.
doing bookstores. And so I pull my car in and I just go, hey, would you like to do a reading? You have my book, first of all, and so I've been doing. I think it's going to be really fun. Sort of part of the tour is trying to go to as many libraries as possible. We want to support our libraries. It's
Mm,
amazing that you could go in and get a free book. I don't think people utilize libraries as much as they should.
right. Yeah. No, I love libraries. Yeah. I completely agree. Well, that's, some really exciting tour dates coming up. So I will leave the links in the description box below for people to check out where Ileana is going to be on the tour. So like the Facebook page to get updates, and you can follow Ileana on Twitter and Instagram. And again, I'll leave all those links in the description box below. Well, Ileana, thank you so much for coming on. This was again, because I'm such a fan. So this is such a treat for me. And again, I love the book and your first book too. Of course, I blame Dennis. If anyone hasn't read that, or what I'd recommend is listen to the audiobook, because that's the best.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's funny. The last thing I was going to end with is that
Yes, go ahead.
a lot of actors have come up to me and said, my agent wanted me to read, I was going to work with Robert De Niro. My agent said, you have to read the chapter, What's It Like to Work with Robert De Niro?
Oh, yes.
They say you break down like and it's been funny. I've had like quite famous actors come up to me and
Oh,
go,
wow, really?
yes.
That's
And
funny.
say, yeah, I read that chapter. It was really helpful.
Yeah, go read the Cape Fear chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was fun, and I'll get back to writing that. There's another specifically movie book that I want to work on, but I'm going to have a follow-up to I Blame Dennis Hopper.
Oh, wow.
It's going to be again, stories, because I like the story format.
Mm.
but they're going to be the more of the darker ones.
Oh, the darker tales of the life of
Yeah,
Ileana. Oh God, okay.
uh, you know, you don't go through like a 25-year career without some of the dark and some of the stuff from the 90s, obviously,
Right.
some of the darkest things. So I think it's time to finally write about those, those
Yes.
stories too, but in my own kind of self-deprecating way, I
Right.
guess. Yeah.
Well, I'm
Anyway,
looking
thank
forward
you.
to that. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so
Hey,
much.
my pleasure. And I hope to have you back again sometime down the road for sure.
Yes, next time promoting a movie for sure. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find just below the video frame, right beside the like and dislike links. Just click the thanks link, and from there, you can leave a donation if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that. And then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.